Hello, welcome to the first session of our new series, Zionism Today, Tomorrow, and Beyond, Expanding the Conversation. My name is Ellie Gettinger, and I'm the Director of new title. I'm the Director of Outreach for the Center for Lifelong Learning at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I am delighted to be part of this conversation. We are exploring topics that came up at a convening that we had a couple of weeks ago at JTS around the present and future of Zionism. And for this next 6 weeks, JTS faculty will share their thoughts on contemporary Zionism, the context that shapes these debates, and where we think we're going. Many of these topics, as I said, were introduced at the JTS convening, and we're really excited to be sharing them with the national audience. You can find the link to the entire series in our chat. Today, we have a very special kickoff session that includes not just our JTS faculty, but the national president of Hadassah. And I want to thank Hadassah for co-sponsoring this event, this conversation between our Chancellor, Shuly Rubin Schwartz, and Hadassah's national president, Carol Ann Schwartz. I also need to thank our sponsors. We have 3 sponsorship levels, and today at our Navi level, Lori Gilman is sponsoring in memory of her grandmother, Anna Goodman, whose hero was Henrietta Szold. And at the Chacham level, we have Karen Price Rafalowitz in loving memory of her mother, Ruth Epstein Price. If you're feeling inspired and would like to honor a loved one or mark an upcoming special day, we invite you to partner with us to sponsor an upcoming learning session. And you can find more information about that also in the chat. At our recent convening, Henrietta Szold, her impact, her work, her legacy kept coming up. In three separate speakers introduced Henrietta Szold, including Chancellor Schwartz, who's speaking with us today. We are delighted to be able to go more deeply into her story and to consider how her work continues through the organization she founded, Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America. As I said, we're privileged to have 2 speakers to talk about Henrietta Szold and her legacy today. And it's my pleasure to introduce them, JTS's Chancellor, Shuly Rubin Schwartz, and Hadassah's National President, Carol Ann Schwartz. Shuly Rubin Schwartz is the 8th Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. She is the first woman to serve in this role since JTS was founded in 1886. She is also the Irving Lehrman Research Professor of American Jewish History. Chancellor Schwartz is devoted to building JTS's unique strength as a Jewish institution of higher learning that trains future leaders through deep study. She served as the Dean of Albert A. List College of Jewish Studies and the Gershon Kext Graduate School. In 2018, she also assumed the provostship. Chancellor Schwartz was one of the first women on the JTS faculty, and she has played an instrumental role in introducing Jewish gender studies into the curriculum. Henrietta Szold, in particular, has been a role model for the Chancellor throughout her career. Chancellor Schwartz has taught, written, and spoken about Szold numerous times throughout her career, including during her inaugural address when she became Chancellor. Carol Ann Schwartz is the national president of Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, the largest women's organization in the United States with an international network of supporters, dedicated to advancing women's health and empowerment, fighting anti-Semitism, strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship, and healing the world through Hadassah's hospitals and youth villages in Israel. Carol Ann has been actively involved with Hadassah for over 30 years. Additionally, she serves on the American Zionist Movement Board, Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and JNF USA Board of Governors. Following her career in banking, Carol Ann joined her family in commercial real estate, and she now runs with her sister the family company, which was started in 1946 by her grandfather. She earned her Bachelor's of Business Administration in Marketing and Management from the University of Cincinnati and a Master's in Business Administration and Finance from Xavier University. Carol Ann and Shuly will be in conversation today, and they will be asking each other's questions. And so we will have a shorter time at the end for Q&A from the audience. Please send your questions to me. If you have technical questions, please send those to my fabulous colleague, Tani Schwartz-Herman. So now, Carol Ann, I'm delighted to turn it over to you and to Shuly to get this conversation started.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And good afternoon to everyone. And I'm gonna start, Shuly, by asking you to provide some historical background on Henrietta Szold. And if you could describe for everyone Miss Zold's upbringing and her path that led her to JTS.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you. Wonderful to be in conversation with you this afternoon. Henrietta Szold, as you heard, has long been a role model of mine. She was born in Baltimore in 1860. Her earliest memory that we know of is being put on her father's shoulders to watch the funeral procession of President Abraham Lincoln pass through her hometown. So very devoted both to her life as an American and as a Jew. She was the eldest of 5 daughters, the daughter of a rabbi, Rabbi Benjamin Szold, who's a rabbi in Baltimore. She received an intensive Jewish education. The only way a young woman could receive that at the time was to sit at the feet of her father, of a very learned father, which she had. And it was typical, not only of Jews, but typical in many families where there were only daughters, no sons, for the eldest daughter to really be reared as a father would rear a son. And so she was privy to a kind of education that really was unparalleled at the time. Classical Jewish texts, Hebrew, Jewish history, and then what a classical education for a young woman might be at a high level: German, French, English, history, etc. She graduated first in her class and was the only Jew in the Western Female High School at that time, around 1880. That was considered the pinnacle of education for a female. She then began teaching English and in a girls' school. And she also served as her father's editor and translator. He was a scholar as well as a congregational rabbi. And when the Jewish Publication Society was formed in 1888, she was invited to serve on its publications committee, already an acknowledgement of the extraordinary learning that she possessed. By 1893, she was her title was secretary, but I would say she was the managing editor of the Jewish Publications Society. And she oversaw, edited, or translated almost everything that they published during that era, including Gretz's multi-volume History of the Jews, and they began publishing the American Jewish Yearbook at that time. So it is no exaggeration to say that she was the most learned Jewish woman, most Jewishly learned woman in America at that time. Usually sentences like that are hyperbole. I do not believe that is hyperbole in any way when we are thinking about Szold. So 1902, her father died, and she was left with all of the research that he didn't complete. And she knew that it was her role to continue to translate, to edit, to publish her father's works. And she knew, as many learned people do, they know not only what they know, but what they don't know. And so she wanted to learn more. And there was just nowhere else in the United States to learn at the level that she was at Jewishly, other than the Jewish Theological Seminary. So she and her mother actually moved to New York. And she was already at the age of 42. They picked up, they moved to New York. They got an apartment right in the neighborhood of the Jewish Theological Seminary. At that time, Solomon Schechter had just come to become president of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he recognized immediately the level of learning that she possessed. And when she asked to study at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which at that time had one school, it was a rabbinical school. I don't have to tell anyone on this call that in 1902, that rabbinical school was open only to men, and she wanted to study at JTS, and he just admitted her as a special student, and she was in class with rabbinical students. And that is how she was able to continue at that level of learning. I'm going to stop here. I know
So
you have
we
more
all,
questions. Yeah.
yeah, yes, I do. But we all know she became a Zionist and she created Hadassah. So how did that evolve? And with Hadassah, she created a dual mission, and how from there healthcare became part of it and became one of those two pillars. How did that evolve to that?
Yeah, so it's a really fascinating trajectory. In fact, Zold was a Zionist already during her years in Baltimore. Already as a young woman, she was moved to volunteer with the newly arrived Eastern European immigrants, Jewish immigrants in Baltimore. And so, not surprisingly, she went to teach English to help them acculturate to American life. And in so doing, she was exposed to the Zionism that some of them brought to Baltimore from Eastern Europe. So she was a member of the Hebrew Literary Society, and she was a charter member of a Zionist group called the Baltimore Chevrat Zion, we would say, in 1893. As you know, that's 2 years before Herzl wrote the Jewish State, and 4 years before the first Zionist Congress. So Zionism ran very deep within her. And when she was in New York already, before she founded Hadassah, she was involved in Zionist study groups, which you know of as the germ for what became Hadassah. It was only in 1908, when she took her first visit to Palestine. This was with her mother. They went for an extended trip, which you had to go for an extended trip because it took so long to get there by boat that you were not just turning around coming back. And she traveled throughout Palestine and really got a sense of what was going on there. So she came back and at that point felt, okay, I got to do something here. And I would say she was very much influenced by uh, progressivism at the time. And what did progressivism mean? Over 100 years ago, that was a movement in which individuals in society were concerned about creating policies and structures that would help individuals who were impoverished, immigrants who lacked economic opportunity, individuals who were illiterate, individuals who lacked health care. These were progressive impulses to uphold kind of the social contract of our country. You think about Jane Addams and Hull House, right? That's what she did in Chicago. Think about Lillian Wald and the Henry Street Settlement in New York. These were impulses particularly that women got involved with at a time, and that was a way in which they felt and definitely did make a huge impact on the world. And Zold thought, wow, like, I believe in all of these things, right? That's kind of what I was doing when I was working with the immigrants and helping them learn English. And what if I took that impulse and directed my efforts to Palestine, where there are impoverished Jews who don't have health care? There's no social work system. There's no safety net for them. These early Aliyah, first Aliyah settlements, they're dying out because people are dying of malaria. They don't know what they're doing. And I think we need to help them. So to her, it was a progressive impulse. And the other thing that inspired her is her own understanding of how privileged she was to have that kind of education that she had. So she felt, I think this cause of helping those who are living in Palestine, improve the conditions there was one thing, but the other impulse she had was, there are so many talented, amazing American Jewish women, and they don't have access to Jewish learning. They don't have the opportunity to develop leadership skills. So I want to create an organization where these women, that we're like building on those study groups. Let's take those study groups to the next level. Let's educate American Jewish women. Let's give them the skills they need, and let the end point of those energies be improving the situation in the land of Israel.
You truly talk about the fact that she recognized she had more opportunities and the education and her brilliance. So how did her practical Zionism differ from the other kinds of Zionism that were emerging at this time?
Yes, well, the Zionism we know about most is Herzl, right? Because he is as known as the father of political Zionism, right? And he felt there's anti-Semitism in Europe. Jews were emancipated, they acculturated to European society, and then anti-Semitism flared up anyway, or maybe because of that. And so he really, and at the same time in Eastern Europe, there were pogroms and there was a concerted effort on the part of the Tsarist regime in Russia to either get Jews out, discriminate against them, right? And so he felt that Zionism was the answer to that, that the only thing to do is for Jews to have their own homeland. And by having their own homeland, that would normalize the Jewish condition. It would end anti-Semitism. So he was interested in taking political steps to make that happen. And even during Zold's era, which is now, move a decade later from that, you have men trying to further that ideal. And what are the men doing? They are meeting with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to get him to figure out how to approve of Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. You have diplomats and politicians working in England to try to get that Balfour Declaration there. And I think someone like Szold, although she didn't ever write it that way, I think she's like, okay, you men, like, you just talk and, go and meet with important people around the world. In the meantime, everything I just said I was worried about, I'm still worried about it, and no one's doing anything about it. No one's providing health care. No one is providing a safety net for the individuals who were there. How do you expect to build up this country when nobody can come and live there safely and securely and prosper and make a life for themselves? So she pioneered what I would call practical Zionism. And as we know, often that is, I don't want to stereotype, but it is often women who will just get stuff done and, don't need to make have the world recognize what they're doing. She just wanted to get stuff done. And that is how she started with 2 nurses, and she was a good fundraiser. She got someone to, really subvent the cost of sending 2 women to Palestine. And I mean, I get chills thinking about it. You, Carol Ann, president of this organization that began just with 2 women going to the land of Israel to provide health care, what we would now call the Visiting Nurses Association, right? This was the beginning of the Visiting Nurses Association. And they just went to tend to the healthcare needs of all of the inhabitants of the land of Israel, Jewish and Arab.
And that's exactly how we started. I mean, you mentioned her first trip to Israel. She was 49 years old, and she saw firsthand the high infant and maternal mortality rates. She saw the terrible public health conditions, and she said, I have to do something. If this is going to be where everyone's coming, where people are living, then we have to send nurses. We have to make sure that this is a healthy place to live. We have to tackle the problem. We can't just keep talking about it. We have to do something. I have to find the funding. So she went to Mr. Strauss and she said, I need the assistance. She found 2 nurses, Rose Kaplan and Ray Landy, to travel to Palestine, to be on that, to take care of the maternity care, to treat the trachoma, the serious, the widespread eye disease, to set up Tipat Chalav, to set up the clinics so that we can teach the mothers how to take care of their babies, so that we can take care of safe healthcare systems across the country. And over the next several years, develop the model infrastructure for Israel's healthcare system. And we built the healthcare system. And a lot of people say, oh, Hadassah set up the model. No, Hadassah actually built the medical infrastructure. We built the American Zionist Medical Unit. We had that all set up by 1918. We did that because Henrietta Szold set it up. And while, as you said, the men were meeting with everyone and talking, and Henrietta Szold came back to the United States, traveled the country, went by train, traveled any way she had to, so that she could meet with the proper donors. And Mr. Strauss had said to her, I will give you the funding if you can find the 2 nurses who will go within 6 months. And she said, I will do that. I will make sure I find them. I will make sure I do this. Within 4 years, we had 8 locations, 8 hospital locations of actual hospitals or clinics set up. We had the nursing school set up. And until 1936, our nursing school was the only school of nursing in pre-state Israel. And until that time, nurses around the world were truly only regarded as handmaidens who would simply implement the doctor's orders, but we were truly training them. It was a revolutionary concept for nurses to receive a truly extensive training to take care of patients' care. And we made sure they received extensive training. And what is wonderful is when you look at the information that they were given, the training they were giving, we still have the handbooks and we've put them in our archives. That's in New York. We still have the first nurse's cap, and it's in our archives in New York, so that we can look back at that information, and that students today, our members today, can see that information of what we created over 100 years ago. And today, Hadassah Medical Organization has the two main campuses, and then we have ancillary locations as well. When I was there last month, we dedicated 2 new ORs at our Beit Shemesh location because we realize the importance of what we continue to do, and we treat over 1 million patients a day. We see that.
So I'd love for you to help us understand, because you helped me understand, like, how did we get from Hadassah achieving everything that you just said, right? And then the medical system in Israel, like Hadassah started it. Now there are many different hospitals. And of course, we know about Hadassah Hospital, but it's one piece of that. But it didn't, it actually permeates much more deeply into Israeli society because of its roots as the only system in the early years.
We had formed the medical infrastructure. And if you look at the buildings, if you're in Tel Aviv and you look at the hospitals in Tel Aviv and you truly look at the signage, and you'll see it'll say, this was formerly Hadassah Hospital, and it'll be Clalit, it'll be another hospital. Because when the state of Israel was formed, they asked, will you turn this over to the government of Israel so that this will be, and will you focus on Jerusalem? Will you focus on one location? And we said, yes, we will. We were there from the beginning. We were there before the beginning, and we helped and we assisted, and we have always been a partner with the government. And this we looked at and we said, of course, we want to be there from the beginning. And we've done the same with Youth Aliyah. When we were asked, Henrietta Szold was asked, when the Youth Aliyah villages, she was asked to take it over, the entire program. And here is a woman of many years. And she at first said, why would you want me? I'm a woman, I have no children. Why would you want me to be taking over to take care of these children? And why would parents from Germany want to be sending their children without them to a country which actually hasn't even been formed as a country? I can't imagine them wanting to do it. And then, of course, we know, history has told us, yes, the parents did from Germany want to send their children to a safer area. And yes, of course, Henrietta Szold did say yes to take over the Youth Aliyah system. But she said yes, and she took over the Youth Aliyah system. And then, yes, we kept some of our villages, and yes, we turned them over to others. Again, working with the government of Israel. Every step of the way, we have always done that. But since 1934, over 300,000 students from 80 lands have graduated from our youth villages, from young immigrants, from refugees, at-risk Native Israelis. They received a full spectrum of care: shelter, food, counseling, education. I always look at it and say the most important thing we can always give them is the love we can give them. To me, it's the basic. And when we give them the love, which is actually the first thing we give them, everything else comes naturally. With the hospitals, there's a reason why Hadassah Hospital was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. We are the bridge to peace. When you walk through those doors, you see what we accomplish every day. It's a beacon of healing for the patients around the world. It's a shared society. People of all religions, all ethnic backgrounds, they work together, they heal together. 55% of all the research projects, the medical ecosystem conducted in Israel comes from Hadassah. We have cutting-edge research. It's being conducted at our hospitals. We're finding cures for ALS, for Alzheimer's. We develop advances in fighting cancer and kidney diseases. We have been a pioneer in several medical areas, including opening fertility clinics for AIDS patients in 2009. We're in the process of completing our Gandel Rehabilitation Center, which is the only rehabilitation center in Jerusalem. We opened it 9 months ahead of time. We will eventually treat 10,000 patients annually. And our hospital's medical work is not only limited to just Israel. Our Cancer Institute has around 3,500 new referrals each year from around the world. And our institute has been a pioneer in personalized medicine treatments using artificial intelligence, CAR T-cell immunotherapy, organoid modeling. What they're doing, the protein beam therapy, its research is unbelievable, and what they're doing is truly state of the art, and its research goes on. And when I look at it, I say it's truly tomorrow's visionaries, and it's things that you and I, when we look at it, it's AI. It's for our children and our children's children to think of what the possibilities could be. You opened the session, with a statement that Henrietta Szold was the most learned Jew in America. And in addition to her learning, she was also a very observant Jew. How did this play out in her life?
It's a great question. We've been talking about the ways in which she inspired so many generations of Hadassah women. But she has been an inspiration in other ways as well. I would say she cared passionately about Judaism and the future of a rich Jewish life in America. She believed in traditional Jewish values. I think that despite her tremendous learning and leadership, she didn't really consider herself to be a feminist. She suffered from what it meant to be a single woman in an era where women were expected to be married. She is someone herself who longed for that kind of life. And I think she was a restless soul in some ways because of that, never really felt at home either in the land of Israel or in the United States. But when kind of faced with gendered religious obligation, she stepped up to the plate. And the most famous example, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is what happened when her mother died. And a close friend, Chaim Peretz, wrote her a beautiful note offering to say Kaddish for her mother, right? As we know, certainly then, that was in 1916. Kaddish was something men traditionally said for a deceased relative. The oldest boy in a family was often affectionately called my Kaddish, because they were the one that was going to have to say Kaddish. So here was Szold in a family where she was one of 5 daughters, and her father died, and her letter back to Chaim Peretz has taken on a life of its own because of what she is messaging for Jewish women. I'm just going to read a portion of that letter for us now. She responded to him and said, I cannot ask you to say Kaddish after my mother. She's very grateful and all of that, but says, no, I can't. Why? The Kaddish means to me that the survivor publicly and markedly manifests his wish and intention to assume the relation to the Jewish community which his parent had, and that so that the chain of tradition remains unbroken from generation to generation, each adding its own link. You can do that for the generations of your family. I must do that for the generations of my family. And then she goes on to say, I believe that the elimination of women from such duties was never intended by our law and custom. And since she actually had studied our laws and customs, she could say that with some authority. Women were freed from positive duties when they could not perform them, but not when they could. It was never intended that if they could perform them, their performance would not be considered as valuable and valid as when one of the male sex performed them. And of the Kaddish, I feel that this is particularly true. And she ended by saying, my mother had 8 daughters and no son, and yet never once did I hear a word of regret pass the lips of either my father or my mother that one of us was not a son. When my father died, my mother would not permit others to take her daughter's place in saying Kaddish. So I am sure I am acting in her spirit when I am moved to decline your offer. This act of assertiveness, of claiming for women a ritual that was traditionally done by men, it has provided inspiration to so many women in the past century, truly. And thousands of women got the courage to say Kaddish for their own loved ones because of what Szold did. The most famous example of that is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for whom this letter from Szold was a big source of inspiration for her. So, I mean, my question back to you is, what does the anecdote say to you about the ways in which Jewish values and Judaism are embedded, continue to be embedded in Hadassah?
Well, first, I look at our mission, and we are still based on Tikkun Olam. And secondly, I look at our policies and protocols, and we still have a Shabbat policy. We still have a kashrut policy. I spent this past Shabbos in Nashville with our Super South, and we had a Shabbaton, and we had services, and we spent it together, and it was beautiful. And in January, we're going to have a Shabbaton with our national leadership, and the women will learn Torah, and they will, they're gonna, and we will end with Havdalah. And I think Miss Szold would be so proud of that fact that we continue to do this. And, the national president continues to keep kosher today. And the fact that we still focus on education and the empowerment of women, and that we train them and we help them find their voice, and we encourage them with their education and promoting their leadership, I think she wod be so proud.
I agree. I think I just yeah, I'm sure she could not have imagined just the impact that Hadassah has had both in Israel. Of course, she didn't live to see the state created, so a lot of things would have been a marvel to her. but especially her own creation of Hadassah and the impact that it continues to have on women today. So, yeah, thank you for that.
We emphasize practical Zionism, and and I understand, she say, okay, a Zionist is you have to live in Israel, but it was important to educate women, and it was important to fight for a better America and for women's rights and to prepare them for leadership. And we have 300,000 members across the United States, every congressional district. And we assist them with having the knowledge and having that voice at their local, their state, their national level, so that they have the information and their voice is heard and their voice is counted. And whether that's at the local level or that's at Washington, D.C., or that's at the United Nations, that we're getting our voices out. We're speaking out for women's rights, for women's health, and we're championing the protections for reproduction, for health, or for freedoms. And we're combating the poisonous rise in anti-Semitism and statements from communities and professional associations that are speaking out against Israel, and they're speaking out with their anti-Semitism acts across the United States, where if you would have told us 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that people would be doing this in city halls, I would have been astonished. Our members would be astonished. So many of our friends are astonished that people are doing this, including attempts to blacklist and isolate Jews, authors, medical doctors, research programs. So we're making sure that we are supporting the authors and we're supporting the researchers, and we're making sure that these things aren't occurring. And at the United Nations, we have been attending meetings, we have been speaking out, and we have been advocating for fairness and justice. And in March, we launched our largest global campaign ever to end the silence against Hamas's sexual violence. And not only did we do it across the United States, we did it around the world to speak out against Hamas's use of rape as a weapon of war. And we mobilized 150,000 grassroots signatures from 118 countries. 119 organizations signed on a petition that we delivered to the United Nations Secretary General, demanding that he take action to hold Hamas accountable against these war crimes. And we delivered the petition to him. We're saying you have to take action. This is who we are. This is what we do. And again, I believe she would be proud. I believe she is watching and she says, you know what? This is what I started, and this is what Hadassah continues to do, of making a difference. And we feel her influence throughout our organization for over 100 years after its founding. Do you think her model of leadership and emphasis on education opened paths to broader leadership for Jewish women in North America?
I mean, look, for sure. You think about the era in which she came of age and founded Hadassah. Women did not have the vote in this country yet. Women's voices were not heard in any public setting, truly, except if they were women's settings. So I think that Hadassah not only provided a path for women to be leaders in Hadassah, which you so eloquently described, but they also gave women the skills and the education so that when other pathways opened up for women, these women were ready to take on leadership roles in many Jewish communal institutions. the her her impact as an Jewishly educated woman was also had a profound impact on the way in which Jewish leadership has evolved in this country. As I said before, she was the first female student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, but there was no real. She had to be admitted as what Schechter called a special student because they didn't know what to do with her. And I believe that Schechter established the Teachers Institute in 1909, just 7 years after Szold, who was became a close family friend of the Schechters. After he admitted her, he knew very well what women were capable of intellectually, both thanks to Zold's example herself and the example of his own wife, Matilda Schechter. And so he established this school in 1909, an undergraduate college that would train Jewish educators and be a place that would provide high-level Jewish learning that from its inception in 1909 was open to women. And so that at the Jewish Theological Seminary, women had the opportunity to gain a sophisticated, deep, and rich Jewish learning where no subjects were off the table because women would be in the classroom. This was a co-ed program, so it wasn't a women's seminary. It was learning for all. And it's no surprise that the conservative movement, which began at the Jewish Theological Seminary and has an ethos of serious, deep, critical Jewish studies, along with a deep commitment to the preservation and evolution of Judaism itself, that this had its impact on the evolution of women's involvement, not only in Jewish leadership roles in Jewish communal life, but in Jewish religious life as well. So the deep Jewish learning, the involvement of women in education, and so as the conservative movement evolved, there was equal education for boys and girls in religious schools. Bat mitzvah was pioneered by Mordecai Kaplan, who was teaching at the Jewish Theological Seminary at that time and the founding dean of that school, of the Teachers Institute. This all began at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and of course has only continued with the ordination of women. And you heard at the beginning, there is a reason why she remains a role model for me as the first female chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. As you like to think, I too like to think that she would be overjoyed to know that I, as a learned Jew, observant Jew, and committed Jewish leader, could take on a role like this, which would have been absolutely unheard of a century ago. So one more question, which I think is something you and I think about a lot. As I said, Szold was born in 1860, which means that she was 52 years old when she founded Hadassah, and life expectancy itself was probably around 65 in her era over 100 years ago. So as an individual who took on this current role myself as a mature adult and not a young upstart, I love the ways in which she is an exemplar of the long arc of women's leadership possibilities and what it means to take on roles like this at a more mature stage of life. So I just wondered how you reflect on that.
I'm the 28th president of Hadassah. And my first act as being the president was I led a global solidarity mission to Israel in January. And we had 2 buses from 8 countries represented. And we met with Israeli officials, nonprofit leaders, hostage families. We went to the South. We met with leaders from the ICRC in Tel Aviv. We demanded that they do their job. We went to the hospital. We met with soldiers and civilians. And as you can imagine, the entire year has been very intensive, and I've traveled the country. And I look at it and I say, I am in the right place at the right time for Hadassah and for myself. And I believe Henrietta Szold was in the right place at the right time for Hadassah and for herself. And we continue to grow, and we continue to do good things and develop more. And if I can advance her legacy of action and healing and teaching and love of kindness, then I've achieved great things.
Amen. Maybe we have a few minutes for questions.
We do have a few minutes for questions. Thank you
Okay.
both so much for that lovely discourse. And pending, we're at 12:50, 1:54. Maybe we could go just a little 5 minutes over if we're really active in this question and answer session. I think my first question is: you guys talked a lot about practical Zionism. Do you still see that there are these different shades of, political, cultural? Do we still have this sense of the diversity of Zionism, or is being a Zionist in 2024 more of a monolithic, yep, we support Israel? Like, how do we see the distinctions between types of Zionism at play in advocacy for Israel today?
We look at it and we say, absolutely, we support Israel's right to exist, Israel's right and responsibility to defend itself, defend its citizens. But it also is that you don't have to move there. Of course, my oldest lives there, so I'm going to go visit him as often as I can. But does that mean, Ellie, you need to move there? No, that's your choice, whether you want to move there or you don't want to move there.
I think that the way we think about Zionism is something different after 1948 than what it was before 1948. And Szold did not live to see the state of Israel created. So there was a coalition of many different ways of thinking about Zionism, many different kinds of Zionism: labor Zionism, political Zionist, cultural Zionist, religious Zionist, all of these different strains of Zionism that came together and worked together, and the state was created. As Carol Ann said, post-state Zionism, on the one hand, means one thing, right? Supporting the right of supporting a Jewish state, which was created in 1948, and that is kind of a baseline, right? It does, and American Zionism never meant Aliyah. American Zionism, as we said in the beginning, was part of this progressive impulse to kind of help things going on there, but never demanded Aliyah as a prerequisite for being a Zionist. And I think that has been true throughout. But so I think now there are many ways to think about what it means to love the state of Israel, to support the state of Israel. And so the nuances are still there. Some of us are more concerned with politics. Some of us are more concerned with what's the Jewish cultural output, the impact of the rich Hebraic Jewish cultural output that the state of Israel has produced, and the impact that that can have on world Jewry. What does it mean to think about the centrality of the state of Israel when now more than half of the Jewish people live in the state of Israel? More than half of world Jewry live in the state of Israel. So it's not a matter of, oh, we're going to support this small group there, but most of Jews live outside. So the equation has changed in so many ways, and there are lots of ways to think about how we might demonstrate our own love and support. And as Carol Ann said, many of us have deep personal ties with the state of Israel. I too have a child living in the state of Israel and grandchildren. And so, I think, to me, one of the most important things that we need to do is build those real relational connections between those who live in the state of Israel and those who are living outside the state of Israel. And there are many ways to do that. One of the reasons our rabbinical students spend a year of study in Israel is that, Zionism is not something you learn about or read about. You actually have to live there and appreciate the culture, develop actual ties and relationships with Israelis and understand it from the inside. And now we have the privilege and ability to do that. It was a lot harder when you had to take a boat that took a few months to get there, and couldn't really.
How can we continue, to use this model to inspire young women today, in engaging both in Zionism, but also just in terms of being empowered leaders? What are the ways in which you see that model continuing through Szold's leadership?
I guess from my perspective, you have to know yourself to be a leader. And so a Jewish woman needs to, that empowerment comes from knowledge. And that was Szold's number one love, right? Was the love of learning and the pride in being educated. And so the more that we can deepen Jewish learning, Jewish knowledge, Jewish education in all aspects of Judaism, the more deeply and authentically Jewish women can speak out and lead and advocate in whatever area they find their passion to do so. And, again, an institution like JTS, that's what we do, right? We are at core an educational institution, because without those foundations, that is what can fuel the career of a Jewish woman in whatever area they choose to devote their energies. But it's that knowledge, education, passion, commitment, that all is the the fodder that is essential to move forward.
And we've set up these opportunities across the country and around the world where it depends upon what a woman is looking for, where we've set them up as communities, we've set them up by age and stage of life, where it could be someone who wants it to be in person. It could be someone who is a younger woman who wants to connect with other young women and they live in New Orleans, or it could be someone who is an older woman and she wants to stay at home and she wants to be online and she wants to be doing it via Zoom, or it could be that it's an older woman and she's down in Broward County in Florida and she wants to be meeting in her community clubhouse and she wants to be and it depends upon how they want to be receiving that education or that opportunity for, and it's also the type of education that they want to be receiving. Or maybe they want to be receiving education in terms of a Hebrew class. What type of Hebrew class would they like to be receiving? An elementary, an introductory, and what type of, we're offering all of these, and at different levels. We're offering also book clubs and at different levels of book clubs. And so we're truly looking at this and looking at it as multifaceted, so that we're trying to meet the needs. When you truly look at 300,000, how do you meet the needs of 300,000? How do you do it via different vehicles and different forms of doing this? So we're looking at it in a multitude of ways, and we're saying to people, okay, if you don't find the way that you really want it, let us know and we'll connect you via the proper form, because more than likely we have the form, you're just not seeing it out there. My husband said to me after I got home last night, he said, your website doesn't tell me this, this, and this. And I'm like, oh, it's there. You just couldn't find it. I'm like, let me show you where it is. So usually it's there. He just couldn't find it.
As someone
So
who
we
deals
have
with
the
the
information.
JTS website, I feel that deeply. I want to close.
It's there. We just
It's there. Just you gotta know. But it always is helpful to know what they can't find. I want to close the
yes.
session by going back to the question we asked in our intro. What can this 20th century Zionist leader teach us about Zionism today? How do you think, what can we learn from her?
If I had to answer it in a nutshell, I truly believe Zionism means something a little different to each person. When you are defining Zionism, Zionism is going to mean a little something different to me than it will be to each of my children. I have 3 children, and each of them will tell you something a little different. And at the shoresh, at the root, it might be the same thing, but it will have a little different flair. And that's okay.
And I would say that what Szold has to say for today is that Zionism has a complexity to it. It's not easy. It was very early on that Szold recognized the challenge of what it means to for Jews to make Aliyah and be in the land of Israel, and a land in which Arabs were already living there. And she was very clear that as those of us who love the state of Israel, who love the Jewish people, who care deeply about its future, need to meet its challenges head on. And I would say that that would be her very clear message for today, something not everybody wants to hear. Complexity is hard, but it is essential. to move towards a more peaceful future, which I hope we find our way to do that as a people.
Thank you
Amen.
both so much. I mean, I feel like I need to say amen at the end of that. May we find a more peaceful
Yes,
future.
amen.
Amen.
And I just want to thank you both for sharing your perspectives and insight. I want to thank our partners at Hadassah for spending this time with us and also sharing this insight and giving us another way of reflecting on Szold and her experience. I also want to re-thank our sponsors, Lori Gilman and Karen Price-Rafalowitz. Next week, actually, before I get to next week, there were links that I shared in the chat with many opportunities and part of the work that that Hadassah does in terms of Zionist education and their programs. I'm also going to put those on our website so you can see them on the page with the video of this if you want to share it with friends, colleagues who are like, this was a great conversation, which it was. And then I also just want to plug our next session. We are going to have the Dean of our Rabbinical School, Ayelet Cohen, speaking with the Associate Director of the New Israel Fund, Shira Ben-Sasson. And they're going to be discussing power and pluralism, Jewish community organizing after October 7th. And I think it's going to be, again, a fascinating conversation. I hope you can join us. For a complete listing of our schedule, you can check our website, and this video will be available on YouTube and on our website. Thanks so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.